Ransomware has become impossible to ignore. Major incidents against the likes of Colonial Pipeline, meat processor JBS, and the Irish Healthcare Service have shown how disruptive ransomware can be. And it shows how it's successful, with one of these organizations paying a ransom of millions of dollars to the cyber criminals. So how has ransomware got this bad, and how can it be stopped? I'm Danny Palmer, this is ZDNet Security Update, and with me to discuss ransomware is John Hultquist, VP of Analysis at Mandiant Threat Intelligence. Thanks for joining me, John. So first of all, how has ransomware reached this point? Because it wasn't always big sums of millions of dollars that were being taken. It started out with ransoms for just hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, at some point it was really about sort of a scaled up approach against a lot of different targets, where you're really just going after single computers, and you would get on the computer and lock it up, and then somebody would pay, would pay to basically unlock their family photos with Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin was the big sort of primary movement, our primary capability there that kind of drove a lot of this, because it suddenly made the monetization process so much easier. And monetization is a big piece. It's always been sort of a bottleneck for criminals, right? This where a lot of the operations, despite how extensive and amazing they could be, at some point you've got to figure out how to get the money out. And Bitcoin solved that problem. And so when we first saw this stuff, they were basically leveraging Bitcoin to get people to pay quickly to unlock their computers. But at some point, we watched these adversaries convert from sort of the onesie twosies against single computers to post-compromise incidents. And so rather than just one computer that gets locked up, we watch these adversaries make extensive compromise of major networks belonging to organizations with the ability to pay large ransoms, and then pay out sums that started off in the thousands, that moved up to the hundreds of thousands, and are now in the tens of millions. It really, the post compromise piece of that really drove this to such a high cost.
So when it comes to conducting the attacks, how are cyber criminals entering these networks and applying the ransomware? And has this happened this way because it's simply the easiest way for cyber criminals to make money from a network they've compromised?
Yeah, I think there's like there is a bit of sort of low hanging fruit that's associated with this problem, right? You hear after the fact, you'll hear that there was some vulnerability that seemed solvable or patchable, or some sort of social engineering compromise may have led to the ultimate compromise. That's something that we're seeing as well, like spear phishing emails. But at this point, I think we're at this point where they are still hitting this low hanging fruit, but there's so much money in this problem that I'm concerned that it's not about being low hanging fruit anymore, right? If you're worth $40 million to someone to compromise, is your security good enough to prevent somebody who's who thinks they can get $40 million out of you? And that's a really hard question to answer. And that's and a really difficult risk to manage. And that's where we've gotten. So now where because the prices of these ransoms have just skyrocketed, and it's almost going to be really hard, even harder than ever, for organizations to secure themselves after an actor who can afford, for instance, advanced capabilities to gain access.
And we've seen increasingly this year how attackers aren't just encrypting data and saying, hey, give me a bunch of money. They're also saying, give us a bunch of money or we'll release this this sensitive information we've stolen, which is just adding to the problem now.
Yeah, so that's one of the more interesting things. And I think that has a lot to do with this concept of post-compromise. So, one of the things one of the sort of factors in post-compromise is these actors, the adversary is making a commitment to a target, right? It goes from the sort of onesie twosie automated incident where I don't really have to commit on any target, right? I hit it or I don't. It doesn't matter to me because it's all coming, the money's all coming back. Well, you got to, this is sort of a different game entirely, because I've now got to pay someone, really. That's how the model works. But I'm going to pay someone to gain access, or gain access over a long period of time, or or at least spend some time and energy in getting into an organization. And that means I want, and I want to make sure I have a certain amount of sunk costs. I want to make sure that organization pays out. And that means I'm going to have to do things like, one, pick organizations that are more willing to pay out, right? That means, or capable of paying out. So I'm going to focus on organizations with the amount, enough cash to pay me, right? Or that are so worried about uptime that they will pay me, right? So, we talked about some of these critical infrastructure targets we recently, those are organizations that are extremely interested in uptime. They have to get back online, right? And they're willing to pay to do that. But the other piece of that is these guys have to, like, I've sunk all these costs in hitting your network. I'm going to force you to pay, right? Even if you make the decision, hey, I can get past this ransomware stuff. Now I have this other piece of this, because not only am I ransoming your data or locking up your data, I'm taking it with me, and then I'm going to start leaking it, right? And that was the other major sort of evolution here, right? It was this extortion bit. So we start, a couple of actors start with, there's websites where they started leaking data, and then it just became a thing, right? Where all of them are doing this, and they're all doing that to compel these organizations to pay out. And if you're an organization and your intellectual property is being leaked out to your competitors, you might be in some sort of legal jeopardy for God knows what, or information is coming out because of that. And you may have serious brand repercussions, right? For no other reason than somebody might think that your organization is insecure. So there are a lot of reasons why this would, further compel somebody to just pay out.
So these groups, these criminal operations, there's no one homogenous mass conducting all of these attacks, but who are these criminals? Because there's quite a few notorious ransomware gangs, or at least the ones around this year, because these groups seem to come and go, but there's a few that seem to stick around and be more infamous than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that's sort of a part of the way the marketplace operates, where you'll start recognizing sort of brands, right? Because the brand is part of the way they get you to pay out, right? You recognize this brand, that they're capable, what they do in the past. They have a website, right? They also have, like, there's a certain, I think, expectation that they're going to abide by the rules, right? If you play by the rules, that they're going to play by the rules too. So brand sort of plays in that. And so we start recognizing these names. I also think there's a lot of confusion sometimes when people say the ransomware name, right? And assume that's the entire business model, right? Like that there's one ransomware gang and they're going after your org. When in fact it's an affiliate model, right? These are all ransomware as a service. So, and the important thing to remember about cybercrime, and I've done most of my career, has been focused on sort of nation state threats, right? Which is all sort of geopolitics driven, right? And you're always like, oh, well, there's a big conference coming up, big summit coming up. We know that there's a bunch of like crazy things that are going to happen in support of that. Instead of geopolitics, it's all economics in crime. And it is really like all the economic principles are at play. And the stuff that you would see in any other marketplace. And one of them is, for instance, specialization, and you see these developing business models, and ransomware as a service is one that has really taken off, and it's been extremely effective. And what it is sort of two parties system, right? One is the is the brand, the developer, and they're developing the ransomware. They are running a lot of the extortion operations. So after you get compromised, they are sort of the one putting the pressure on your organization. They have the brand, they have the customer service, right? They're the ones you negotiate with. And they're really running the development, right? So they're constantly doing the R&D. And on the other side of that, you have the affiliates, right? And these are the orgs that are going out and affecting first, like basically those compromises. And they might, by the way, be working with other players as well, who might have gotten them a foothold somewhere and then passed on those footholds, which they then purchased and then maybe more extensively opened up and then brought in the ransomware. So they'll be the ones who deploy the ransomware on a target, which is then sort of taken up, and they're doing taken up by the ransomware as a service group. And then there's a profit sharing that's going on between the two of them. I was trying to think of a way to sort of relate this, and I don't know exactly how it plays out in Europe, but in the United States, a lot of beverage companies kind of operate this way, like Coca-Cola. For instance, Coca-Cola Maine, the one we kind of think about all the time, runs the brand. They develop the new Coke Zeros and all the new drinks. But somebody else does the bottling and delivery, right? That's a whole nother problem. And so there's these bottling companies that are actually separate from Coke Maine that are the ones who are getting that Coke into your hands. But even though that they're being delivered a recipe or parts of the recipe that they may actually then bottle.
You mentioned these nation-state threat actors a minute ago. When it comes to the sophistication of these ransomware developers, how do they compare to nation-state threat actors now? Because it seems a lot of the time, a lot of the same tools, techniques, and procedures are used in ransomware attacks as are used in nation-state attacks. I mean, they could even be seeing, oh, that nation-state is doing this, that works. We can make some money off that by using it for ransomware.
Well, it's funny. In some regards, the state players are following in the footsteps of the criminals in this space here. Even the more advanced state players. So, I've spent a lot of time looking at the actor that we call Sandworm. This is a Russian GRU actor involved in the 2016 election shenanigans, but they're probably best known for having turned out the lights twice in Ukraine. And in order to do that, they had to basically affect these really complex compromises of their grid. And they've been slowly developing or using some malware that is essentially like purpose built for industrial control systems, right? Some really cool cutting edge stuff. But the most aggressive attack they've been involved with was basically a fake ransomware attack. It was a ransomware attack. It was ransomware that you just couldn't unlock, right? And so that I think this capability is so useful that state actors are starting to use it, and it's blurring the lines. The other thing is we're watching. We know that North Koreans are using ransomware, Iranians are using ransomware. It's a great way to, and we're not sure in some cases whether or not it's attack or if it's it's fundraising. So it's blurring a lot of the lines here, and I expect that the criminals are going to continue to sort of teach state actors here a thing or two, and I really think they're actually on the bleeding edge. And here's the other incredible thing is there's so much money now coming in to this space. So, one of the things that we saw, for instance, the NotPetya incident, right? One of the pieces of it was this Eternal Blue vulnerability, right? This allegedly came out of the NSA or some U.S. capability. I don't think that's ever been, perfectly validated, but the theory is that it sort of came out of the U.S. cyber capabilities. So here was this so the U.S. State capability that was sort of driving this action. Well, if there's this much money coming into cybercrime, you can expect that to sort of flip, right? Rather than the criminals leveraging those vulnerabilities after the nation states have basically been caught red-handed with them, you can start expecting now that the criminals are going to be using these the exploits, the exploits first, rather than the other way around. And that's something that I think we might see in the future.
And it's quite interesting how, you look at the Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident. I mean, there's probably nation states that would love to be able to cause that amount of disruption. And in this case, a ransomware gang has done it. And it seems that they have maybe bitten off more than they can chew in this regard, in terms of how DarkSide, the ransomware as a service operation, has reacted after essentially the US government is trying to come down on them.
Yeah, I mean, and so that I think that's that's a good point. So I don't think they necessarily want this much notoriety, right? Of course, they want to be like recognized, and when you ransom someone, you just want them to pay, right? So, but I don't think they necessarily want the U.S. government on their trail. They probably took a step too far. I'm sure that the other ransomware gangs are pretty upset with them, but there have been a handful of players who have continuously stepped over the lines. One of the actors in particular, one actor that we tracked in particular, has shown a regular interest in healthcare systems. And this was like mid-pandemic, right, when the margins in healthcare systems were so razor thin. And and it was so important that everything was working at optimal, sort of optimal capability, and they were hitting it then. And there were ransomware players who came out at the beginning of the pandemic and said, "Look, we're not going to touch this. We're criminals, not animals," or something like that. We're never gonna go that far. But somebody did. Somebody recognized it's a great place to get a payout, and they went after it. And I think that shows that, some of these guys will sort of self-regulate. I expect a bit of self-regulation. But, when everybody else self-regulates, there's always, there's almost, there's a good chance that somebody's going to come out of the woodwork and decide this is the sector they want, no matter what. And I think that's something we're probably going to see from now on because of the amount of money that's involved here. But an ability to regulate this. These guys are not going to see a jail cell anytime soon, unfortunately, unless, for instance, we get the Kremlin to play along.
That raises a good point, because there's been many instances where ransomware victims and governments, both the US and UK governments, for instance, have identified ransomware group X as the culprit. But because this group works in parts of the world where they're hardly likely to send people to the United States, for example, to stand trial, they're almost getting away with it because in that regard. Yeah,
I think that Russia. So they're not all out of Russia. I should make that clear. They're operating out of other Eastern European countries. They're operating at places like Ukraine. The difference is that the Ukrainian government's always been an excellent partner with regard to a lot of this stuff. We don't expect anything from Russia. We don't expect Russia to play nicely here. And then there's some question of whether or not this is essentially national capability, right? It's keeping us on our toes. It's keeping us distracted. It's undermining our government, which is, by the way, the goal of their actual state capabilities. The NotPetya capability, right? The sandworm capability, the sandworm stuff that we saw elsewhere, even in the election. The whole point of that capability is to undermine institutions, right? It was not going to take America to its knees through cyber. That's not really a possible outcome. What is a possible outcome is that our institutions look weak and incapable of securing us. And this criminal activity is doing exactly that. right? We are now going to have to go and negotiate with Vladimir Putin over this and the long line of other things and long list of other things, and we'll probably have to give something to get him to put us, to do something to disrupt this, and it's unfortunate.
Ransomware has been a growing problem for a while. So what is it about the Colonial Pipeline attack that seems to have spurred action on this? I mean, I guess ultimately, is it something that hits the, for want of a better term, real world, and rather than just being, oh, look, some files are locked, it's you can't get gas anymore because the systems are shut down?
I mean, look, we knew this was coming. Everybody knew this was coming. Last year when the hospital stuff was going on, we were screaming at the top of our lungs, this is going to happen. We've got to, start thinking about this now. We got to take stronger action. So nobody's really surprised. I think, in the sort of threat intel community, we knew this was going to happen, but it did. It's affecting consumers now, right? It's not behind closed doors. People couldn't get gas. I mean, there were gas lines right outside of my home, right down the road, like a block away. That people were backed up, and that's ransomware affecting their everyday lives. And it won't be the last time, by the way. We are deep into a vicious cycle that we are going to have to work very hard to dig ourselves out of. And there's a lot of things that we can do, but I don't think it's going to change overnight.
One particularly interesting element of the Colonial Pipeline incident is how the Bitcoin that was paid in the ransom, a lot of it has been seized by the US government. So two things here. We touched on it earlier. So how important is Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in ransomware? And how does elements like this, like the government seizing that money, we're talking millions of dollars here, how does that disrupt ransomware?
Well, so monetization, when it comes to cybercrime, monetization becomes really complicated. It's always been sort of the bottleneck, right? You can get your hands on a bajillion, credit card numbers or sort of any kind of token for money, but the part where you convert it, through mules or something like that, that's where everything stops. And cryptocurrencies provided sort of a way around that because it's, it allows them to sort of move this cash freely around outside of regular systems. It's just provided a much easier monetization stream. It's a big piece of it. And I don't want to say it's not necessarily that cryptocurrency is fueling this. The money, the tremendous payouts are fueling this. Cryptocurrency just makes the monetization easier. I would say that at some point, just like sort of the rise of e-commerce led to a certain amount of crime, increased crime. It's sort of a similar concept, but we do have this opportunity now to sort of step in and look at how if we can disrupt those streams, like we've done with sort of regular monetary streams in the case of terrorism, as it's been sort of been compared to lately. And this move by the DOJ, I think, is just awesome, right? We are thinking about this problem in a totally different way. I am sure that there have been dozens upon dozens of FBI field offices that have open cases on these Russian, or on these ransomware gangs, right? They absolutely have open cases, and there's a possibility down the line that we might, affect some arrests, but we are really not at liberty to really focus on that right now. We have to focus on disruption. The problem is out of control. It has to be stemmed, and the best way to do that is probably to go after the money. There's some other opportunities. These are, like I said, these are businesses. They have people who work in all these different sort of jobs within these business roles within these businesses. I'm sure they have Excel spreadsheets and all the sort of trappings of office life. All that stuff can be disrupted. And I think we need to be right now focusing on every opportunity we can find to disrupt their behavior. And that could be separating them from the other, the other criminals who we might regard as less dangerous. Some of that is going on right now. Some of the other criminals, by the way, the forums are kicking out the ransomware operators. I would love to see us take an active role in driving a wedge between them and the sort of their criminal brethren. I would love to see us attack their sort of business, the sort of trappings of their business and disrupt it. But I think the money is the really strong place to start.
And when it comes to protecting against ransomware attacks, what can organizations do to make sure that they're not the next victim? They're not the next person or organization we're speaking out as being a big victim of a ransomware attack?
So I think, when we talk about sort of preventing them, and there's a lot of things you can do to prevent ransomware attacks. I think the other half of this problem is just being prepared for a ransomware attack, right? So do you have a plan if your information starts leaking out? Do you have suitable backups? Can you get back online in time where you're not going to feel constrained or pressure, as much pressure from an actor like this? I think that's super important as well, and that goes all the way from backups to what's the CEO going to say out loud when this happens. So public communications plan. All those pieces need to be in place now, and not when it hits the fan.
Hopefully anyone watching this can take this information to their CEO and say, hey, help defend us now. Thanks for joining me on ZDNet Security Update, John. It's been a very interesting discussion about ransomware. And for more information on how to protect your network from ransomware and other cyber attacks, be sure to like and subscribe to ZDNet YouTube channel. And of course, keep reading ZDNet. Thanks for watching.